Post, and I'm going to share with you my presentation on student resilience, creating an action plan for Education 506. I want to begin with this quote by Henry David Thoreau: "Things do not change, we change." And while it can be difficult as educators to feel like we may not be able to improve the adverse childhood experiences or trauma that our students experience outside of school, we do have the ability to make changes in the way that our classrooms and schools are run to be able to help students build resilience, and to be able to help them have the skills and the tools that they need to overcome their challenges. The purpose of this presentation is to create an action plan for how professional educators can best promote resilience and recovery for the children and their families who have experienced traumatic events. First, I'm going to go over my action plan, and then I will give a summary of how childhood trauma impacts students and their learning. Next, I will explain how to build resilience and support the growth of children and educators in maintaining their well-being. And then I will conclude my presentation. So first, to discuss an action plan. Why do we need an action plan? Well, children who have experienced trauma or toxic stress come into school carrying an invisible backpack of the effects of their trauma, according to Rawson. And so because of that, they may be bringing in a lot of different things that can impact their well-being, can impact their learning and their ability to interact socially in the classroom. And so staff need to have an action plan for how to mitigate that trauma and how to respond to students and their needs. So if we go over the original ACE study statistics from 1998, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration cites that 22% of the participants in the original ACE study experienced sexual abuse, 25.5% experienced substance abuse in their family, and then almost 19% experienced mental illness in the family. So if you look at those statistics, most students are going to be coming into the classroom with some sort of adverse childhood experience. So educators, it's absolutely imperative that we know how to respond to our students' unique needs and to have an action plan to be able to serve them. So according to the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, in the state of Minnesota, which is where I teach, 38.1% of students have experienced at least one ACE. And so we have to act. We have to intentionally create a safe environment. We have to create stable, trusting relationships with our students. And we need to recognize the signs of trauma and respond to students' needs with these research-based practices to help them build resilience. So the definition of resilience, according to the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, it has to do with adversity. So children will be more able to adapt to adversity and threats when their basic human systems are nurtured and supported. This is what resilience means. And so in order to foster resilience, there's three core interventions. And the first is, and this happens intentionally, but it also happens just through the different parts of a child's school day and their learning in the classroom, is improving their cognitive development and problem-solving skills, helping them learn self-regulation skills, and then lastly, building relationships with caring adults. So some of the barriers and strategies with this in building resilience, some barriers are children may have protective walls up. They may be in that fight or flight response. And so they may not be open. They may not be in a headspace where they're receptive to some of these different interventions. Also, their previous trauma can be triggered at school, and so that's going to impede them um, from building that resilience, from working through those things if they are feeling triggered. Some strategies that can help with this are those positive, stable relationships with a non parental adult over and over and over again. We as teachers talk about the importance of building relationships, but it is so important for students who have experienced trauma, especially, to feel like they are validated and supported and cared about by someone who's not in their family. And then also creating feelings of safety at school, emotional safety, physical safety, mental safety, psychological safety. Students need to feel safe at school. So now I'm going to summarize how childhood trauma impacts students in their academic learning. So these are three core areas that are affected by trauma and toxic stress. One is brain development. Another is executive function. And then lastly, relationships. And so uh, any combination of those things can create a manifestation of trauma um, at school or in the classroom in students. And it looks different from student to student. So some students might exhibit anger or aggression or fear. They may be in that um, fight response. Or if they are feeling fearful, they may be in more of a flight response. If their HPA axis is activated, then they are not um, going to be able to self regulate in the same way. And so these kinds of emotions and feelings may arise in the classroom. Um, Other manifestations of trauma, a learned helplessness or feeling hopeless. If a student has experienced repeated trauma, their brain has become wired to just expect that difficult things are always going to happen, that they're always going to be experiencing what's the next trauma, what's the next thing that's going to come at me. And that may create feelings of hopelessness. Um, Other ways that trauma manifests are in executive functioning. And so this can carry over more into the academic areas. So issues with working memory, issues with emotion regulation or self regulation, um, issues with staying focused and on task and goal oriented. So it's not going to be the same from each student. So that's why it's so important that we as educators recognize those signs. And then how do we build resilience in children, and also as we support our own well being as educators? So academic and social resilience comes from these four core areas. So problem solving. And this for students helps the brain go back online after they've experienced trauma. It helps um, their brain to rewire those neural pathways um, that may have been lapsed because of their trauma. Also, cognitive development. This means um, development of the prefrontal cortex and executive functioning, which is so important in order to be successful and a resilient human being. Self regulation. So, this goes with memory, being goal oriented, frustration tolerance, emotional regulation. This really encompasses a lot of different things. Um, but students need those academic skills to be able to regulate themselves so that they can learn, but also just their own emotional and mental regulation. And then lastly, being able to learn how to have healthy relationships, especially if a student has experienced trauma in their family or in their friendships or in their community, whatever that might look like. Being able to learn how to have healthy relationships, having that modeled with an adult or modeled with other students and peers is so important. So, some resilience practices for educators, because we as educators, we need to build our own resilience as well, because we give to our students, and we have to make sure that we are taking care of ourselves as well. So, these are my top 3 resilience practices for educators. The first is to fill your cup. You cannot give to your students if you have an empty cup. So, finding what fills you up, creating space in your life for that, and making sure that we are taking time to replenish ourselves and to care for ourselves because we give so much to those around us when we are at school. Another practice is setting boundaries. So leaving work at work, that could be that could look a lot of different ways for different people, but just making sure that there is some work-life separation and setting those boundaries, however you need to, does not make you a poor educator or someone who's selfish. It means that you're actually caring for yourself so that you can care for others. And then lastly, gratitude. Practicing gratitude daily gives us reminders of the positive things in our lives that can be emergency positivity when we need it most in a challenging situation. So, in conclusion, this is a quote from Al Siebert, and he says that a few people are born resilient. The rest of us need to work consciously at developing our abilities. This is so important to remember because I think sometimes we just think that, well, I should just be resilient, I should just be strong, or my students should just be resilient. But it's really something that is intentional, it's conscious. It's not something that some people are born with and some people are not born with. It's something that is achievable through practice and through research-based interventions. So I just want to say thank you for watching my presentation. I'm really passionate about trauma and resilience, building in myself and with my students. And so if you have any questions, my contact information is there on the screen. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a good day. Goodbye.